Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Marj Britt, founder of Called by Love and Living Loving Legacy and Called by Love Institute and all of the courses and so many wonderful things that have come out of that over the last 10 years. So amazing to realize how spirit works, coming from the invisible into the visible, even when we don't know how it's going to show up. So we're in another moment of that unknowing in our lives and on this planet. And today I am so excited to be introducing one of the people that I think you are going to just be amazed to meet, Reverend Grandon. And then tomorrow, many of us are going to be involved in the Frontiers of Consciousness course that is starting with Terry O'Fallon. And Terry is one of the amazing researchers in consciousness. Her research stands on the shoulders of 40 years of really, really high-quality research that has been done by incredible people. Don Beck is one of those researchers, and a university professor when he started it, and ultimately going to South Africa and doing 63 trips in the transition from apartheid into the time of Nelson Mandela. And then Ken Wilber and the amazing research that he's done in the integral movement and how all of that's come together with so many people, including Suzanne Cook-Greuter, who worked, with whom Terry O'Fallon worked, originally beginning to understand all of the scoring processes for that very high-quality research. Suzanne got her doctorate from Harvard and included that research. And Terry, I met probably about 4 years ago, and took me into a whole new realm of my life that I had no idea would be coming, no idea how I would be involved, and no idea how it would change my life. So that starts tomorrow, Frontiers of Consciousness. And if you're not registered yet, you can still register today, but then the cutoff is for registration is today. And there's information in our reminder email. So that's one of the amazing things happening this week. And today, the other amazing thing is Brian Grandon. And Brian, welcome. I'm so delighted you're here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
And Brian, you and I met in sort of an unusual way. We didn't know each other. And both of us were at the last public lecture of Dr. David Hawkins. He knew it would be his last public lecture. How did you happen to show up there?
Well, I had started reading David Hawkins in 2005. A coworker told me about Power versus Force, and I read the book, and I said, wow, probably 1,000 times. And then over the years, I had a calling back in the early 80s to become a full-time minister. And at that convention, my car was loaded up, and I was actually, I had gone to several lectures. And I stopped off, was living in San Diego, and I stopped off in Sedona, or wherever it was, a few miles down the road from Sedona, actually. And that was 2011. And you were there, and you gave a little honor. It was an honorarium thing, and you spoke briefly, and you introduced yourself as a Unity minister. And I was on my way to Unity Village to start seminary, in fact. And so I called you, I looked you up, and through the Tustin found you, called you, and said, "Hey, let's connect sometimes. How does unity and devotional non-duality interface?" And I was grateful to have met you then.
That was so beautiful for me, because David Hawkins had profoundly impacted my life. Tony Bain had introduced me to David Hawkins and said, "Oh, Marj, you've got to meet him." She had brought him to Unity Village and had been so blown away by his teaching. And she had gone to some things, lectures with him, and just he is the real deal. And so I went to some lectures with him and ultimately invited him to Unity of Tustin, and he came here. I first met him in 2003, I'm guessing is when it was. It could have been before that. But the book that he signed for me, Power versus Force, has a beautiful inscription in the front of it. And it just says, with love. And David Hawkins, and it's dated in June of 2003. So I'm just so delighted that you and I were able to connect, because at that point in time, I really was trying to find my way to connect unity with David Hawkins, and doing everything I knew how. We brought him, Tony and I, and Tom Zender, who was CEO at Unity School at that time, brought him to Unity Village to do a presentation to the ministerial school students, and also to the Board of Trustees, and also to do a public lecture and an intensive, and that was all wonderful. A lot of people, several people came with me from Unity of Tustin to go to that, and it was so profound. That was when he went into the archives and he calibrated some of Charles and Myrtle's writing on some of the original documents in their handwriting. And you have some of those, I understand.
Yeah, Eric Page, who at the time when I was in seminary was leading the archives work, he allowed me to photocopy all the results of the different calibrations of the different things. So it's really wonderful. I still have that.
And if I'm remembering some of these things, and I think they're original, I think there were 21 principles. Some of the highest scores that David Hawkins calibrated were in the 900s. Am I remembering that accurately?
Yeah, something that anybody can get a hold of is the first book that Charles wrote, calibrated in the 900s, in the low 900s. And basically, Charles lifted most of the most powerful scriptures in the New Testament, a lot of Jesus quotes and some of the other apostles of the really high, juicy stuff. So it's Christian Healing is the name of that first book that he wrote in 1908. That was in the 900s. The first belief statement that he and Myrtle hand wrote, I think, was also in the 900s. So in fact, I'm looking for that file right now. I'm in my office. So I'll see if I can find it.
Incredible. And then the other interesting thing about that is he wrote at multiple levels. And, the whole speculation I've heard people talking about, that he dropped in consciousness. I don't think he dropped at all. I think he accessed what I call vertical awareness. And he had the ability, which is my passion and deep, deep, deep commitment, to be able to teach to people wherever they are. It's the same way Jesus taught. He taught in parables so he could speak speak to people, for those who have the ears, those who have the ears to hear, the eyes to see, and realizing that not everyone would understand at the same level. But the parables gave everyone access to understand at their own level of maturity and consciousness or vibration, whatever you want to call it, the vibratory field that is energetic. And it's really clear to me that that's what Charles Fillmore did. It's like an elevator shaft where you can go from seventh chakra awareness and beyond, clear down to wherever people are hurting. And the book Prosperity, for example, was one that he wrote at the time of the Great Depression. And I don't remember what it calibrated, but I know it was not as high as Christian Healing.
No, most of his works were not near that. But yeah, that one really stood apart. So yeah.
But the other thing that I'm so aware of is that in that book Prosperity, which interestingly enough, the times that we're going through now may create that kind of incredible reorganization of the whole system of how people live and create their ability to have jobs, and because unemployment was so high, and of course we're in one similar period now, and that in that book, Prosperity, he wrote a section on the stages. I don't think he called them stages. I think he called them days, maybe, of creation as an evolutionary path. And this is where he identified the parts of 12 powers that were the original mentioned 12 powers. He wasn't calling them 12 powers yet. He didn't have 12 powers. He had 7, but ultimately he elaborated them into 12. But he based them on the 7 days of creation. And Eric Butterworth eventually picked up that organization of those powers and put them in his book on creation, and then later they were reorganized into the 12 powers and organized according to the way Jesus called the disciples. But it's so interesting, all of he never wrote a book, not once, never wrote a book. What he did was he taught, he lectured, and then people transcribed those lectures and turned them into books and organized them into chapters and that kind of thing. And so any other comments on that before we transition?
Yeah, in fact, Marj, what you're saying about that is seeing some of the original manuscripts. There were literally pieces of paper cut and pasted from lectures that he had spoken, from brochures, and then it was pretty loosely edited. So it was reading old Fillmore was like taking a roller coaster ride, because he could have said something 20 years ago and it's next to a paragraph of something he said a week ago, so it was quite a work to put together his quote books.
Well, the other interesting thing for me, because Unity School commissioned me when I was in ministerial school to write a book called Experiencing Prosperity, and I worked with the Unity School editor for most of the year on it. But then and I used quotes of Charles Fillmore and developed experiential exercises, and they were intending to publish it, and then they decided to do an anniversary celebratory kind of publication, and they were going to combine some of his books in these anniversary issues of them, reissues of them, and so they delayed the publication of Experiencing Prosperity. And in the meantime, I went to Walnut Creek, and the person that had worked with me in editing it quit at Unity School and went someplace else. And that book never got published, except, for when I spiral bound it and and worked with it. But it's fascinating that when I was teaching at one time from one of those spiral bound copies, I was teaching with David Now, who had been a disciple of Muktananda and Swami Muktananda for many, many years, and had actually been the MC for his world tours and knew him very, very well. And I invited David to co-teach with me, and he was totally blown away, because as we were teaching the chapters in that book on prosperity, he would say, "Oh my God, this is almost a direct quote out of the Upanishads." And he would point it out. He would read it in the Upanishads, and there it was in some of Charles Fillmore's writing. And interestingly, it was, as you said, the editors played sort of loose with it. There weren't even credits at the end of the book, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
It's very, very fascinating.
It would not pass today's standards of editing, so.
Of publishing today.
Yes.
Although all of his books, at least as used to be true, are in the public domain. Because when I was working with them, I found that out. And that was his choice. He never copyrighted them because he wanted it to get out however it got out. He was so committed to these teachings going out to as many people as possible. So amazing background, amazing, and I'm so grateful that you and I reconnected, and you introduced me to a beautiful group of people in San Diego that we all meet on Zoom on Saturday mornings and study David Hawkins' material. And I see that some of them are on the call today, so I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm looking at Jordan's name. Welcome, Jordan. and I'm thrilled that some of the people from the Saturday morning David Hawkins group are with us. So the world's in a mess, Brian. It's in a period of chaos and turmoil and confusion and loss and shattering. And so I think it would be wonderful for us today to start with an opening prayer. And I would love for you to lead that, and then as you finish, I'll perhaps join you.
Be grateful. Well, David Hawkins did say that even as crazy as the world may seem, it is the perfect place for us to evolve our consciousness. And so it is with gratitude that we enter into prayer and find out and discover that presence, that awareness that's within us that is divine, that is eternal, that is that part of us that is eternal, that cannot die. And we surrender all the ego mentations and all the distractions, and we focus in this inner sanctuary of peace and silence. We come into this place, and that is the divine presence of the Most High, the Holy Spirit, the Holy of Holies that dwells within every soul. So, sweet Spirit, we just come together as one in one voice with a heart full of peace and hope and love to see what is ours to do in this time, if anything. If it's to pray, to meditate, to support, to love, to bless, to do, whatever is ours to do, may it be done. Give us the strength, sweet Spirit, to follow through with the callings that we've each uniquely received. We bless this time together, that hearts may be enriched, challenged, comforted, and just loved on. Thank you, sweet Spirit. Marj, I pass it over to you.
And I'm just deeply moved to just bring in the invocation that was actually ascribed by Charles Fillmore. I am now in the presence of pure being and immersed in the Holy Spirit of life and love and wisdom. And in order that we may include all of us, we'll change the I to we. We are now in the presence of pure being. We are immersed in the Holy Spirit of life and love and wisdom. And we acknowledge your presence and your power. Oh, blessed Spirit. Now, erase our mortal limitations. Dissolve our human limitations. And from your pure substance of love, bring into manifestation our world according to your perfect law. And so it is. Amen.
Amen.
You know, I had that framed and it hung by the water cooler in the hallway just outside the door to my office at Unity in Tustin for many, many years. And at one point it was taken down, and so I brought it home, and it now hangs on my wall here. and I read it almost every day and invoke that presence and invoke that power. And you know, it's amazing to look at our lives and to see how we've grown into these teachings. So, Brian, let's start with you. You met Dr. Hawkins in 2005, but you had a life before Dr. Hawkins. Tell us, I think sometimes we forget that all of us have our sacred love story, is what I call it. Mm. It's not an ego story. It's a sacred love story. And we don't even often recognize it. Sometimes there's tragedy in it and loss in it, but it's guiding us somehow, and we're going through one of these times now of tragedy and loss. And tell us a little bit about your life. What was your childhood like? What was your family of origin like? Let's start there.
Well, okay. So my mother was above average intelligence, near total recall, very, very intelligent. She was from a farming family in south central Kansas. My dad was from the other side of the tracks, from a rough cultured background. And as a parent, my dad was really rough around the edges. He was a rager. And so, I had a little bit of trauma in the early days. Some of the earliest memories I had were, running from Dad because he would go off. I had one experience one day that later I heard Hawkins describe. He had the same experience years earlier. But I remember chasing my sister around the house, and I was 3 years old, and all of a sudden it's like I just kind of woke up. And I looked at my little arms and legs, and I'm like, wow, how did I get in this little boy's body? And a few moments later, a question popped up. It was, what if I didn't have a body? And my imagination went out into space and said nothing. And every thought, every memory, every laugh, every story that anybody had ever heard about Brian, every laugh, story, anything that I had ever experienced just evaporated to nothingness. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified of having never existed. And then a moment later, I'm like, wait a minute. I do exist. I do have a life. And I remember just saying, man, I don't want anything to do with any of this stuff. I just want to be a little boy. And, eventually I considered myself an atheist. I only went to church a few times. Really, if I spent Saturday night with Grandma, she'd make us go to the Salvation Army Church. And I had seen a lot of hypocrisy in Christianity. Grandma was a rager, but magically every Sunday morning when they arrived in the parking lot at the church, she turned into an angel. And I just thought that was, it was fake. And so I rejected it. Years later at 15, I took a philosophy class, and they talked about the world religions, and stuff I had never heard of was coming up. And at that time, I started a mantra. What happens after we die? Is there life after death? I kind of want to know, what are we here for? And that became a mantra in the background. At 19 years old, my sister had become a born-again Christian, and she kept inviting me to church, and I'm like, yeah. And I was partying hard. I did some, pretty heavy drugs back in the day, hallucinogens frequently. And, I decided to finally go to church with her. But the night before I went to church, I was at a party, and it was before I even started drinking, and it was like the inner eye, the third eye opened up, and I could discern behind the facade that people were propping up. And I could see that a number of people were lonely and scared, but they were pretending to be hip and got it together. This is really strange. The next morning when I walked into church, the same thing happened again. But what I saw on a number of people was something I had never seen before. And it was contentment and joy. And inside I knew these people know some truth. Because I had been asking, what is the truth? And a little while later, the pastor started speaking, and I was in my chest. It was like the alien was going to pop out of my chest. The turmoil in my heart was pretty incredible. There was like a wrestling match between my ego and spirit, my ego not wanting to give it up. And by this time, I was obviously agnostic, kind of asking, what is the truth? Not denying that there was a God, but wondering what the truth is about God. And as the pastor spoke, I was so moved. I knew he knew the truth. And a week later in my sister's apartment, I got on my knees, and she led me through the sinner's prayer, which is basically the first 3 steps in 12-step. My life is screwed up. There is a God, and I surrender my life to God. And in that moment, it was like a flashback to when I was 3 years old and my imagination being out in outer space. But at 19, I looked around and I realized that it was extremely peaceful and calm. And there were no planets, there were no stars, there was no gravity, there was no time, there was no body, there's nothing, just absolute silence. And the stillness was so tranquil and so peaceful, I never wanted to leave. And my sister kept yammering on, and I'm like, wait. And I described it to her, and she started praying against it. Oh, God, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, no, this is God. This is God. And haven't heard too many Christians describe the void. And it wasn't, I think 27 years later, I heard Hawkins describe the void in a lecture, and I'm like, that's it. And then he shared the story of when he was 3 years old, and then when he saw that he had a body, he was really disappointed. I thought it was really cool. But he had this recall at a much higher level of consciousness than I did. So again, I saw a number of parallels that Hawkins also went through years of being an atheist. He was also years of a devout Christian. I went through years of being a devout Christian. And then I met people from other faith traditions in the mission field in the Philippines. I saw Muslim people that were phenomenal, loving, kind, gracious. I had friends, fellow students of Hawkins that were Buddhist and Hindu, and we sat down and we shared our devotional practices, which were exactly the same. And I just realized that, we just have different terminology. There's only one God. But based on our culture, our family tradition, our family of origins rituals, one is normal and the other one seems really weird. And so unity puts all the really weird stuff together and honors all pathways to God. So I eventually discovered unity, and that to fulfill the calling I had when I was actually a missionary in the Philippines, to become an ordained minister. So that's life in a nutshell.
That is so beautiful. Just wonderful, Brian. Just amazing. And it's so fascinating how we all have our backstories. And it's like step by step, we're being leaded, we're being guided, we're being shown the way. And every part of our journey, even the difficult childhood, even the raging father, all of it becomes part of what will become our purpose, our commission, our call to help others, to begin to guide others through. It's all part of a very, very sacred purpose, a higher calling. Your story is wonderful.
Yeah, I think that we all learn a particular language growing up, and it's that particular language that enables us to help share the light we found through that language to our peers, to our groups, to our people, to our tribe. And, this little light of mine.
You know, I was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist, which is very fundamentalist and very literal Bible. The great gift of that was that I knew the Bible probably better than anyone else in my ministerial school class, because I had studied it 5 days a week, an hour a day, all the way through school, grade school, high school, college, not mystical Bible, not metaphysical Bible, literal Bible.
Right.
And it was so easy for me because I was willing to let go of one structure in order to evolve and mature into the next structure. It was so easy to just, this is what this means. And first it was a symbolism of metaphysics. And then all of a sudden, all of that got dissolved into the mysticism. And then what happened was this vertical awareness coming in, that all of it is part of the oneness. All of it is part of the evolution of consciousness. And the involution of consciousness matches us up perfectly with how it is going to work in us and through us and as us, as we live our purpose in the world. So it's so incredible. So Sherry from San Diego, is on the call, and she's saying hello to you, Brian. And she's saying, I can't wait to hear you talk about Doc's teachings in your Unity ministry. How do you weave it in?
Well, honestly, I'm, the Unity movement calibrates in the low 500s. Hawkins, was an avatar, which is north of 985. And so for me, and I wrestled with this and prayed about this, Sweet Spirit, help me. What is mine to do with bringing the most effective message? What's the most powerful message I can bring forward in a church setting? Because, when you speak on a platform, you're looking out at a community of church, you're looking at all the different levels of consciousness out there. You got people that are addicts, and, in El Cajon, we had people sitting in the back that were homeless, and they'd always kind of sit in the back of the church. They were welcome to sit anywhere they wanted, but they'd hang around for the fellowship hour to be able to hang out with people and get some free food. And they, we were a warm, hospitable place. But anyhow, you have people from, that are not spiritually awakened at all the way to people that are on the threshold of enlightenment and everywhere in between. And so when you give a message, it's like, it can be very confusing to some and simple to others. And for others, it's like, why is this pablum here? But the language of love seems to be the universal language, and that Jesus taught unconditional love. And it just seemed like if that became the focal point of my talks, like Hawkins would teach that once people are at the level of consciousness of love, they're in the tractor beam. As long as they continue the path, that they don't have to worry about anything. If one lends themselves to it, one can eventually become enlightened. Maybe not in this lifetime, but eventually. But by being in the tractor beam of love, that's really what matters. And on the map of consciousness, I don't know if you have one handy, but at the different levels of consciousness, there's a factor there. I shared this with you the other day, that the happiness of people at a different level is different. Okay, so I'm being very confusing here, but at the lower levels of consciousness, hardly ever happy at all. There's a threshold when somebody takes that third step or surrenders their life to Christ or to the God of their understanding or whatever it is. When you surrender your ego to spirit, your happiness doubles, more than doubles. It goes from about 22% of the time to 55% of the time one is happy. But when people are in feeling shameful and guilty and in grief, they're hardly ever happy. In grief, you're only happy 9% of the time. And fear, and so many people live in fear these days, you're only happy 10% of the time. And so, we think being prideful is a great place to be, but they're only happy 22% of the time. But when people are in the level of love, not even unconditional love, just love, they're happy 89% of the time. And the gateway to experiencing love and then unconditional love has to be through forgiveness. The Course in Miracles constantly teaches forgiveness. Unconditional forgiveness is the gateway to happiness, to unconditional love, and then eventually into the miraculous. So it's focusing on love. Yeah. Well.
And love is at the level of 500. And so the unity framework, that is, when you said they're in the low 500s,
510,
that's where
I believe,
unity
is
framework is.
Yeah.
And their God view is loving. David Hawkins talks about the light view is benign. There's non-judgment comes in there, and discernment is still there. But and there's a reverence. And there's the process, interestingly, David Hawkins says, is revelation. And that's fascinating, which means that revelation is going to identify more.
Right. Yeah, the spiritual journey moves from being very linear up, and then when you get into love, it's very nonlinear. 2 + 2 no longer necessarily equals 4. And a lot more things make sense that didn't make sense in the linear realm. And so things are revealed spiritually of that knowingness. All of a sudden, it's just like a download that there's a knowingness that this is where I'm to go.
So I absolutely love David Hawkins' teachings, and I went back knowing that we were going to talk today, and grabbed one of my old journals of when I had taken notes of when he came to Unity of Tustin, and he made the comment, and I had written it down in my notes, that 85% of the people on the planet make you go weak.
Right.
They calibrate below 200.
Right.
85%. They calibrate below 200, which is a negative force field. It's the negative polarity as opposed to the positive polarity. And that 200 and above is the beginning of truth, the beginning of self-honesty, of humility, of taking responsibility for the self. And in the 500 is where 500s, there's the new paradigm. And I loved, he used the word, it is a world of the experiential. Now that really lit my fire because I was trained at UMass in my doctoral program in experiential education. And I am really, really good at it. And all of a sudden, I found a home in David Hawkins' awareness of what experiential learning is. Yeah. And everything is part of it. And we become a witness to all of the kinds of potentialities that are there with the potential of becoming actual. And another thing I have in these notes, clear back to then, when he was at Unity in Tustin, is only 4% of the population reaches 500.
Right.
And then the next shocker, 0.4% reach 540. And at 5, that's unconditional love.
Right.
And that's where there is a willingness to let go of all perceptions. And he talked about that at 600, there's total transformation. And that's where he placed A Course in Miracles and Enlightenment, and also the level of kinesiology, which I use all the time.
Yeah. And he distinguished between the text and the workbook. The workbook actually calibrates at 600, but the textbook calibrates at 550. So he encouraged people to just do the lessons, focus on the lessons, because there's at times when the text makes the ego the adversary, but he taught to love on the ego like a pet. And through love, it'll trust to the point where it can surrender ground to spirit. But if it's made out to be the bad guy, there will be this adversarial relationship within you and within your mind that doesn't promote the advance as much as seeing it as a pet. So, sorry to interrupt you.
No, I want you to. So interrupt as much as you want to. I love the fact that I had written down at that time that he said that the linearity of the mind dissolves, and this is as you go into 600, that there's no content, and that the field is being itself.
Yeah.
And that at 600, it takes most people out of the world.
Right.
Because the experience is so complete and so totally fulfilling. And 600 is the beginning, just the beginning of the states of enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah. The mind shuts off. You know, I had an experience one day in meditation that the mind went silent, and it was that way for the entire day. And it was a unitive experience, so that if I looked out at a tree, I could feel the tree respirate. And the mind was kind of in shock, but it lent itself to this utter silence within. But then this is where I think the perception gives way to reality, and it was like the third eye was open, but it was, you could see the world, but there was this calmness, and there was this certainty of everything's going to be just fine. Everything that you could see is the divine flow in everything and the harmony of the universe. And there was nothing to worry about. You get it. And Hawkins said this many times. There are no accidents in the universe. And, you know, God is not a puppeteer. God allows. But it's like iron filings. We are drawn to the behaviors that are concomitant, or that dwell in that particular zip code. I like to talk at consciousness levels as zip codes because it's a good metaphor. So like I'm in Florida right now, and the foliage, I'm in North Florida, and so there's pine trees and oak trees. But, you know, in Phoenix, there's none of this stuff. But it's not better. It's not worse. You know, it's just different. And so there's different experiences at the different levels of consciousness. And
well, it's like I was born in Boulder, Colorado, you know, right at the foot of the Rocky Mountains. You know, a tremendous gathering there now of Buddhists as a result of Naropa University, which used to be Naropa Institute. And that's also a tremendous gathering of Seventh-day Adventists that used to have a hospital there. How did the universe plant me in Boulder, Colorado? It's different than Phoenix. It's different than Palm Trees.
Yeah.
Was it because it was a match to part of what I was supposed to absorb in the vibrational field? Was it both and?
Well, you know, I saw a question. Somebody asked Hawkins a question. If we chose the families with which we were to incarnate, and he calibrated yes, that we participate in that decision. It's not solely our decision, but that we basically, it was up to us, and did we want to incarnate in this family? And it's like, yes. So we have a choice, and I really believe what he taught is that, you know, we're born into a family. Don't ever think you're a victim, because you're born into the perfect environment for the evolution of your consciousness. He said this should dispel any victimhood whatsoever. And calibrated is true that the family that you were raised in prepared you for all those things built up in your karmic past, gave you the tools so that you could transcend those things. And so, you know, the practice today is to look back and look at all the things I learned from my father. And I love my father. He transitioned about 4 or 5 years ago. But we made peace when I was still a teenager. We used to hang out in the garage together, rebuilding first my bicycles and then his motorcycles. And then when I got old enough, then I would wrench on my motorcycle with his motorcycle, and we became friends. And I learned a lot from him. He was the best grandfather anybody could ever wish for, patient and loving and kind. but he did a lot of growing up. And I learned so much from him and his character of how much he loved us by his actions, even though emotionally he may lose it sometimes. And he worked really hard on overcoming those kinds of things. So go ahead, Marj.
I have been toying with, and maybe it's not, that's a total misrepresentation, because that's not the right description. I have been aware that sometimes souls are brought into families with a vibration that's different than the family. For example, they may have a high resonance of love. They may have a high resonance of intuition. They may have a high resonance of knowing that doesn't come from the rational mind. And they may be in a family that is highly intellectual or values the intellect, and it almost feels a bit like a mismatch if we look at it from the level of the intellect. And yet, my question, and I already have the answer, I believe these souls are divinely brought into that family in order to bring that family to a higher vibration. That could be true of you, Brian. That you held a vibration from the moment of your birth, the I am presence, the essence of who you are, that's showing up now, but it was also there as a vibration in the invisible from the time you were born.
Yeah, I don't, was there a question in that? Or is that's how you see that we're brought into these two?
Into families that are sometimes difficult.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And, we all react differently to those stressors. I have a brother and a sister who are amazing professional careers. One just retired. My oldest brother was, like me, kind of a risk taker, adrenaline junkie. That was my addiction, was to adrenaline. And, we all took different forks in the roads with the same set of parents. And that's reflective of our personal karma. And we enter into the mix and we share those things that we bring in, to the family. And, I think it's how we look at it. If we can look at what's to benefit, what can I learn from this? What can I gain from this? And rather than being a victim, victimhood, like Marxism, calibrates at 130, super low, because it displaces all responsibility to some perpetrator. And I've seen Hawkins field some really difficult questions of, people that were abused very badly. And it's a challenge. We don't know what's happened in their life karmically in previous lifetimes, but when you're beset with a seemingly incomprehensible challenge, how do you get through that?
So here's a question for you. It's from Jordan. And here's the question. When I'm going through fear, such as fear I can't solve a work problem and will be fired, or I've done something friends or family don't like and I'll lose them, how can I focus back on the goal of being loving?
Well, that's not easy. Fear is thinking that there's something out there that's going to really hurt me, harm me. And we get it, that if there's something that professionally could upset you and you're concerned with your livelihood, that's a tough one. What Hawkins teaches on that, which I completely support, is that, do the and then what game, where we think about the worst case scenario of being fired. Okay, and then what? Well, then I'll run out of money, and then what? Well, then I'll lose my home, and then what? And then I, will run out of money to buy food, and then what? Eventually you die. And if you can surrender to that ultimate fear of death, it'll unlock every other fear. And so if at any minute, we can be, accept transcending, stepping out of the body and being complete here in earth, that then, Hawkins taught we should be able to release all of these fears. And whenever a fear creeps in, we can go back and do that inventory and ask those questions. How can I, unlock this gripping fear? And some managers use that as leverage to motivate people. It's kind of old school today, but we try to keep people because the investment in a new employee is significant, and we don't want turnover as managers. We want to, train and help people evolve with, new technology and stuff. So, and I forgot the other part of Jordan's question. What was that?
Well, just how to focus back on the goal of being loving that you speak of.
Yeah. The Buddhist practice, metta, and compassion, unconditional compassion. And, when it's really hard to love, the quickest way is gratitude. Gratitude calibrates at 520. To go through everything that you can be grateful for, to think about all the things that have happened in your life that have been a blessing. And so I've, tried to teach that when you're in a pickle, just start thinking of what you're grateful for. It's the quickest way to get back to love.
I'm glancing at the notebook where I took the notes from David Hawkins' lecture so many years ago, and he's talking about 15% counterbalances the 85%.
Right.
That 15% of people who hold this high vibration of consciousness can counterbalance 85% just by the virtue of what they are.
Right.
Just the vibration of their being. And then he talked about 540, which is unconditional love. Mm-hmm. And he said, love is not an emotion that goes from me to you.
Right.
It is a way of being.
Right.
You see the beauty of all that exists.
Yeah, there's no economy in love, meaning that the more you love, the more, because it's a divine quality. So the more you love, the more you're capable of loving. Some people think that, if I love this person, I can't love that person because they don't like each other. No, we don't like Dr. Todd. Just because you love chocolate doesn't mean you have to hate vanilla. We don't have to choose sides. We can love everybody because it is a divine quality. It radiates in all directions. It's not conditional. Divine love is the map of consciousness is broken up into three major parts. The bottom of the map of consciousness, those people below integrity, below courage. Courage is that line where is integrity at 200. Below that, it's all about getting, and Hawkins would say gettingness. In the middle of the map of consciousness is doing. The doers of the world. You calibrate from 200 to 499. And then from 500, the nonlinear realm, love, on up to enlightenment, it's all about being. And Hawkins would teach, like people ask Ramana Maharshi, what can I do to make the world better? He'd say nothing, because the world you see doesn't exist. But perhaps the highest calling is to hold space, for the world, to intercede, to pray for the world, for the advance of consciousness. We pray for peace, and in unity, that's a real popular thing, is to pray for world peace. But Hawkins, recently I was listening to a lecture from, I think, '04. He was talking about valor, how soldiers give their lives in an act of valor. Now, courage, you think, is 200, but valor is 505. It's for the love of the soldiers to the left and to the right that a guy will jump on a grenade and take his own life to save his friends. That is valor. That is love. And so most men transcend 200 by dying in battle, by walking into the hail of bullets, according to Hawkins. Most women transcend 200 historically in giving birth to children where the mortality rate was not a certain thing. It was taking their own life at risk. And so it's kind of naive to think we're going to end war anytime soon, because 85% of the world is below integrity. They're in getting this. If we look at everything leading to World War II, where there used to be these colonies all over the world, and Japan was just taking resources out of China and taking them out of the South Pacific. It took them a while to evolve in consciousness as a nation to just trade, and they're far better now than they were before World War II, just through trade, through commerce. And a lot of people also that hang out in unity also poo-poo capitalism, and it calibrates much higher than these other forms of, like socialism, and certainly Marxism doesn't calibrate very high. But if it can be a win-win and not given over to greed, it can be a really good thing. So I can ramble forever, but
trouble.
Yeah.
There was a period of time in my life when I was going through something extremely difficult, and it had to do with Unity of Tustin. And it was after I had retired, and so there was a part of me that absolutely wanted to run away. But I can see a pattern in my life where I've run away from things. And what I've chosen to do instead was to go into prayer and to simply go absolutely deep into the silence, even if I had to do it 1,000 times, go into the silence and ask, what am I to do? And I got to where I would get really good answers over the 19 years I was senior minister, and lots of amazing things manifested. And the campus of consciousness, pretty incredible. But this period felt really dark to me. And I would go into I feel just really lost. And I would go into the silence. What am I to do? What am I to do? I only got one answer. And this went on for a period of over 2 years. The only answer I got for 2 years was be present in the presence.
Mm-hmm.
Be present in the presence.
Yeah.
That was all. And and what I knew is I couldn't run away if I was supposed to be present.
Mm-hmm.
They don't match. Be present in the presence.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a whole different story there, Marj. So that's a topic for another day, because your energy being in that place, that's a huge dynamic there. So anyhow,
and now I'm going back to my notebook with David Hawkins, where I was writing down things he said, this is one of the things I have highlighted. How does one change the world? They change it by the sheer power of the energy field that they transmit. And he's talking about this field in the 500s and 600s.
Yeah.
How does this change the world? They change it by the sheer power of the energy field that they transmit.
Yeah.
And it requires having compassion for ignorance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Not feeling wounded by ignorance, but having compassion.
Right.
Not judging ignorance, but having compassion.
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody's on their journey. And if we were to be frustrated with somebody, ultimately that's arrogance. That's our own spiritual pride. You know, thinking people should be as elevated as we are, you know, and beat our chests like we're all that in a bag of chips, you know, and, you know, we've been everywhere on that map of consciousness, man. We've been in the gutter. I know I have in my life. I've been all over the bottom of that thing. And, you know, but for the grace of certain people that have reached out to me and loved on me when I thought, you know, I was, you know, not worth it, it had a huge impact on me. And they didn't have to do anything. There was a loving presence that some people that, knowing them, that I warmed up to. But, you know, those people that are enlightened, they evidently radiate so much energy that it changes the world, and they don't even have to get close to people. And I think that's the avatars. You know, one person at 1,000 can counterbalance the entire planet, you know, one avatar. And there's a whole lot of negative in the world, but love is so much more powerful.
I'm going to share one more thing I highlighted from my notes from David Hawkins, and then we'll have Fabienne come on and tell people how to raise their hands. One of the things that David Hawkins said is our point of perception is the consequence of our arbitrary positionality.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A thing means something different if we're at different places on the map of consciousness, because we'll interpret it through the eyes of that field, through that zip code. We have a lens, a way we experience the world. The thoughts that enter our head when we're in a low level of consciousness are not the same thoughts that enter our head when we're in a high level of consciousness. It's completely different environment, atmosphere. The thoughts are different. We think they're our thoughts. No, the thoughts are indigenous to the field of consciousness where our consciousness resides. As we move to another field of consciousness, our thoughts change. That's the problem I have, if you will, about the 12 powers, is to me it's backwards. Because if we immerse ourselves into just surrender, to me the spiritual Fab Four are devotion, humility, surrender, and contemplation. And as we practice those things, I believe we can migrate up the map of consciousness. Transcending the Levels of Consciousness by Dr. Hawkins is a book that is a textbook on how to transcend the levels of consciousness. Yeah. But in so doing, we realize that those thoughts don't belong to us. They're just a product of the field.
So, the 12 powers is something I absolutely love.
I know you love it.
My book is based on the 12 powers. I never really talked. I taught it for 19 years, but I hardly ever used the phrase 12 powers. People didn't even know I was teaching the 12 powers. And someone said to me the other day, I am so tired of the 12 powers. And I said, what are you talking about? It's all in the 12 powers. There's fundamentalism in the 12 powers. There's normative in the 12 powers. There's what's happening now in the 12 powers. There's metaphysics in the 12 powers. There's mysticism in the 12 powers. Depends on where someone's located in their own consciousness. So get over it. Find yourself.
It just seems awfully linear to me. So, yeah. Well, to each his own.
And then the last quote from David Hawkins from this, and then I'm going to ask Fabienne to come on. He said, "You create the moments in time because you witness it. In reality, capital R reality, there is no time."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Everything you're witnessing, you are part of a creation of the moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
Quite amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Fabienne, can you come on and tell people how to raise their hands? We have about 20 minutes left.
Yes, and it's a wonderful exchange. Thank you both. Very powerful. So some of you who are on the broadcast, on the web call, I have already found that you can send us written question that way, so that's great. And if you're on the phone and would like to interact with Marj and Brian, you can simply press *2 on your keypad, and then that will let us know that you would like to talk. So *2 on your keypad if you're on the line on the phone. And in the meantime, there was another comment from Sherry from San Diego. She wrote, "Doc said that we change the world not by what we do, but by what we have become." Thank you, Sherry.
Incredible.
Yes, I do not see hands yet.
So while we're waiting for hands coming up, Brian, there's a question again from Jordan. Do you have plans to teach online?
Yeah, I think that's going to happen. I think, we've been enjoying a sabbatical this year, and it's been really wonderful. And so we've, Kristen's done a couple of guest speaking things. I guess I did one too. But yeah, we'll get back out there. I've immersed myself also in school. I've got 3 classes going here this term, and so.
So let me ask you a question, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
How would you like to do this again sometime?
Yeah. Let's, as long as we don't talk about the 12 powers.
Okay.
That's funny.
That's a deal. We won't do it.
It gives me a rash. Reminds me of an SEE class.
That's funny. We do have a hand in the meantime. So while I unmute Heidi, I remind everybody else, *2 if you want to be next. Okay, Heidi, you are unmuted. Good to have you with us.
All right.
Heidi? We cannot hear you. Maybe you're on the web call, yeah, but we should still be able to hear you unless you're muted on your computer. We're not hearing you yet. If you want, maybe dial back in with your phone. And the dial-in information was also on the email. Sorry about that. That was unfortunate.
So, Brian, let me have you respond to some of the things that you've felt or experienced as you've talked about all of the things we've talked about today?
Well, I've shared my story a number of times in 12-step groups and from the pulpit. And, it's nice to be able to just come right out. I share, virtually every week I would be sharing devotional non-duality, which is what Hawkins titled his teachings. But that would pretty much show up every week, because it is my primary textbooks are virtually everything he's written. There's one book I don't read that often, and our group is reading it right now, ironically. But so it's just nice to be able to open one of Hawkins' books at virtually any page, and you've got some meaty material to share from the pulpit that can really help people out. Because there was a guy that participated in 12 Steps that has seen, was a medical doctor and a PhD. He was a Mensa genius, brilliant mind, fully enlightened, and speaks English and was in our generation. And so we could see him in person and hear the teachings. It was like, sitting with the Buddha. And he was such a sense of humor that,
I loved his laugh.
Yeah, I think more than anything, devotional non-duality has helped me laugh at myself, to see that I am not finished evolving. And the moment I think I'm all that in a bag of chips, I'm going downhill. So, it's a constant wash of surrendering my spiritual pride, admitting my shortcomings, practicing the 12 steps, which I need to get back to, it's a great spiritual practice to clean the slate, to purify the heart, to throw off the shackles. So,
So let's see if Heidi has gotten back. Are you back yet, Heidi?
Heidi, can you try speaking?
Okay, I have another question.
Okay.
I have another question here for you, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
This is from James. I often feel conflicted with striving toward financial independence and spiritual goals.
Mm-hmm.
Can one have both?
I believe so. Jesus was very careful. He said it's the love of money, that leads us astray. It's to where the love of money becomes more dominant than spirituality. But in business, if you're thinking win-win, Magic Johnson once spoke to our company, I worked 4 years ago in the mortgage industry. And, he's the only person to ever individually own a few Starbucks stores. All the rest of them are corporate. But, he went up to them and he goes, look, I got to work, you got to work, but this wasn't his pitch to Starbucks. It was his pitch to other business people. He goes, you got to work, I got to work. Why don't we work together? Why don't we make money together? And it was just, it wasn't a win-lose. It was a win-win. And I think if we maintain that attitude that you learn from the book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, there is no conflict at all between making money and being spiritual. It's a discipline. It's a work. And if you need to or want to, you can, punch out at the end of the day. I had a period of my life where I became a workaholic. And it was consuming, and my children paid the price for it, and I can never get those years back. So there's an excess. Whenever anything is an excess, then it's a problem. So it's just monitoring, watching.
So I'm going to shift over toward talking about the Frontiers of Consciousness course, and one of the things that's really, really clear is that these very rare stages in the frontiers of consciousness are the stages that are about being. And right now, I'm having some amazing conversations with some of the people that are going to be in that course. One of them is a person from the United Kingdom, and I had an hour-long call with him just this week. And he's very involved in coaching and working in financial arenas, but the key about that is the element of greed is missing. Greed is not there. What happens is that competition backgrounds as collaboration foregrounds. And what we begin to do is we begin to find the ways to work with each other and find the ways to become collaborative in the world of work and making the world a better place. And so he sent me some quotes that I absolutely loved, and I immediately ordered the book on some of the new coaching materials that are coming out for this realm of consciousness. And so here's the question from Heidi. This is, I was wondering, Marj, what are the 12 powers?
Oh no, I'm gonna disconnect now.
Do you speak of these and the frequencies in your book? Yes, Heidi, they're all through the book, but I hardly ever mention the word, but I talk about them from mystical levels. That's the difference. Because they're mystical, they're not in the normative realms, and they're not in the traditional realms. My Bible interpretations are pretty much 100% mystical. It's the only way that they come through to me. And then Heidi also asks, do you believe in reincarnation? And the answer to that is yes, but not in a linear way. I don't believe that I lived in a certain decade or, that kind of thing, and will come back in future decades. I believe in reincarnation as multiple realities existing simultaneously. And I, as a soul, show up in different realities, in different realms of consciousness, either in this body or a past body or a future body. And in this body, I'm called Marj. But it's absolutely fascinating. This is sort of a side statement. In the last class that we did on dream work online, one of the people had a dream about Joe Biden in a Civil War era. Well, guess what? That made perfect sense to me. Multiple realities existing simultaneously. So right now, yes, but it's very different than the kind of reality that. And can you send this to Heidi, please? Come online and say it. And then let me ask you also a question from Alana.
Okay, let me answer that first. People don't know when they're on the line that I'm moving between two rooms when I bring you things. So I'm not on the phone when I'm in between rooms. But I was sharing a document that has the 12 powers and some information. So, yes, Heidi, I'll send that to you after the call where you can have the details about the 12 powers.
Or you can get them in my book. The document Fabienne is sending you is more normative. The document, the interpretations in my book are more mystical. And Alana is saying, this was just fabulous. Oh, Alana is also a Unity minister, retired. I have also studied Hawkins, and was there on his last appearance in Arizona. She was there when you and I were. Please help me now to register for your course. It starts tomorrow. So I'll get back to you, Alana, on that. And Jordan is asking another question. What is it like being a married spiritual teacher? And what do you think Dr. Hawkins thought was the benefit of that? Or how could raising children help with spirituality?
Well, wow, having so my wife is also an ordained minister and now a student of Hawkins. And so to me, there's more friction. And when there's more friction, there's more evolution. And, the biggest benefits, I think that's it. I think if you're aligned and if you're helping each other on their path, neither of us are perfect, and yet, we get together, we communicate very well together. We're committed to supporting each other in the spiritual journey. Sometimes it's difficult conversations, and but we're both committed to growing, to moving up the map of consciousness and surrendering those attachments that hold us back. So in that way, my wife is a great partner. We're spiritual partners, and we have a very synergistic relationship. The benefit of having children is there's a part of yourself that you find out real quick, because these automatic reactions that you will have in parenting are the way you were parented. And so it takes a lot of work to not pass down to the next generation the things you've been trying to unlearn in your adult life. And it stretches you. Your life is no longer your own. You're not number one anymore. You're living your life for your children. And sounds unhealthy. Obviously, you need to take care of yourself and be healthy so that you can be healthy and a strong person to love and to protect and guide and lead your children. So, but it stretches you. It challenges you. It's all good.
So let me share a quote that I printed out that I just love. I posted this recently on my Facebook page. Every choice, and it's from Charles Eisenstein, who is an absolute genius in consciousness. He is just an amazing soul. Every choice that we make, individually and collectively, is a kind of prayer that aligns us with a certain reality and a certain future. It's a declaration of here is who I want to be. Here is the world I want to live in. Every choice that we make, individually and collectively, is a kind of prayer that aligns us with a certain reality and a certain future. So collectively, this is a very important thing for people in America to realize as we go into only 50 days before November 3rd. We're going to be taking the temperature of the collective consciousness on November 3rd, and it will be a declaration of who we want to be and the world we want to live in. So it's real fascinating. And I loved one of the things that, again, going back to David Hawkins, how amazing it is that how do we change the world? We change it by the sheer power of the energy field that we transmit. And having compassion for ignorance. You know, our point of perception is our choice. Except when we have things come up that need to be healed. And that's a gift. It's something for us to look at. So I had another email from Simon Sinek, and I love actually the mission and vision of Called by Love that's on Living Loving Legacy was based on his work. And in the one that came into my inbox this morning, he says, it doesn't matter when we start. It doesn't matter where we start. All that matters is that we start. And then he has one more thing. He's added these recently on his emails. 20 years ago, my sister and our family suffered a tragedy that we don't talk about very often. She wanted to talk about it with the hope that it helps someone. I think it will help a lot of people. And then there's the link for what he wants to share, or what his sister wanted to share. That's why our sharing on calls like this makes a difference. It can help a lot of people if we share it from a high vibration of consciousness. And what I knew, Brian, what I absolutely, totally, 100% knew when I invited you to come on this call today and talk with me about David Hawkins is that you would come from those levels of consciousness that are 500 and above. And it's so amazing to just have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you. I'm very blessed to be here. Thank you. Okay, can I share my favorite quote of Hawkins?
Yes.
The experience of the presence of God is available and within at all times, but awaits choice.
There it is. Choice. Right back to that Charles Eisenstein idea that every choice is a prayer. And my guidance when I kept asking, what am I supposed to do? You know, to do is an active verb. It's in that realm of in the 400s probably you're talking about, Brian.
Well, we got to take the garbage out. If we don't take the garbage out, nothing. Got to do something.
And so, for 2 years, I only got one answer, and I went into prayer and I asked, I would say 1,000 times. For 2 years, only one answer: be present in the present. Pretty amazing. Well, Brian, what I want to say to you is this has just been an amazing gift for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I would love for us to do this again sometime. So just know that that's in the back of my mind.
All right.
Well, and we always end by playing Liebestrom. I started playing it originally when I was in my teenage years on the harp. And it's been sort of the theme song of my life. The translation for the title, Liebestrom, is Dream of Love. So I wanted to say one more thing. I'd love for everyone on the call today to set an intention, and you can do it in one word or more. Set an intention for now starting today, this moment, until Christmas, which is the birth of the Christ. It's exactly 100 days. The power of one going into infinity. So what I'm asking everyone to do is to set an intention for the choice you want to make for what you want to live for the next 100 days. Between now and Christmas, 100 days. My choice is to live love in every single moment, every single thought, every single deed, every choice. Is this what love would do? Knowing that this is the power to choose my future and perhaps the power for the collective. Because remember those statistics? 15% counterbalance 85%. This is David Hawkins, just by virtue of what their essence, their vibrational field is. So let's close with Liebestrom and deep, deep gratitude, deep, deep love to everyone.